Hi there, welcome back. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's begin. The streets of Malaga, Spain, were alive with the chatter of merchants, the scent of salt from the nearby Mediterranean, and the echo of church bells that marked the passage of time. It was in this vibrant coastal town on October 25th, 1881, that Pablo Diego, José Francisco de Paula, Juan Nepomuceno Crispín Crispiniano, María Remedios de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz, Picasso was born, a name as grand and elaborate as the artistic revolution he would one day bring to the world. His father, Don José Ruiz Blasco, was a respected art teacher and painter, specializing in doves and still lifes, while his mother, María Picasso López, carried within her the fiery spirit of Andalusia. From an early age, it was evident that young Pablo was no ordinary child. While most children were still mastering the art of forming letters, he was already sketching figures with uncanny precision. Legend has it that Picasso's first word was pis, short for lapis, the Spanish word for pencil. It was as if art had been imprinted in his soul before he could even form coherent sentences. His father, recognizing this extraordinary talent, became his first mentor. In the dim glow of their home studio, the smell of oil paint lingering in the air, Don José taught his son the fundamentals of classical painting, perspective, anatomy, light, and shade. Yet, even as a child, Picasso's brush seemed to rebel against the strict lines of tradition. By the age of 7, his sketches showed an astonishing maturity, capturing the depth of expression in a way that defied his years. But it was at 9 that he created Le Picador, an oil painting of a bullfighter that foreshadowed the themes that would later dominate his career: power, movement, and the raw energy of life itself. As the years passed, Picasso's hunger for art consumed him. By the time he was 13, his skills had already surpassed those of his father. One evening, as they worked side by side on a painting of a pigeon, Don José put down his brush, gazed at his son's work, and with a heavy heart, declared that he would never paint again. His son had surpassed him. With this realization came a new chapter, one that would take Picasso beyond the sun-drenched streets of Malaga to the prestigious La Lonja School of Fine Arts in Barcelona. At just 14, he entered the academy, a place where young artists spent months preparing for entrance exams. Picasso finished his in a single week. Professors were astonished, but the rigid academic style, focused on realism and historical compositions, suffocated him. In Barcelona, he found inspiration beyond the classroom. The city's El Catregà, a lively cafe frequented by poets, painters, and intellectuals, became his second home. Here he engaged in deep discussions about art, literature, and politics. It was the turn of the century, and change was in the air. Impressionism had broken the rules of representation. Post-Impressionists like Van Gogh and Gauguin had paved the way for a new language of form and color, and Picasso was listening. Then, in 1900, with barely enough money to survive, Picasso made his way to Paris, the city of lights, the epicenter of the art world. It was here, among the bohemian streets of Montmartre, that he would begin his journey toward becoming one of the most revolutionary artists of all time. Paris, 1900. The city pulsed with artistic energy, its streets alive with the echoes of revolution and reinvention. The towering silhouette of the Eiffel Tower watched over the bustling cafes of Montmartre, where poets, painters, and philosophers debated the future of art over glasses of cheap wine. It was in this world of gas-lit studios, of absinthe-fueled conversations, of a relentless search for meaning, that Pablo Picasso arrived, a boy of 19, eager to carve his name into the fabric of history. His first months in Paris were a battle for survival. He shared a cramped studio in the Bateau Lavoir, an old rickety building that housed struggling artists. The room was cold in winter, suffocating in summer, But it was here that Picasso found his artistic soul. He painted relentlessly, sometimes burning his own canvases for warmth when money ran out. He wandered the streets, sketching the beggars, prostitutes, and performers of Parisian nightlife, figures on the margins of society, faces marked by hardship and fleeting joy. Then came the tragedy that changed everything. In 1901, Picasso's closest friend, Carlos Casagemas, a fellow artist from Spain, took his own life after a failed romance. Picasso was devastated. The exuberance of youth gave way to a deep, all-consuming sorrow. He plunged into his grief, and from this darkness emerged the first great period of his career, what would later be called the Blue Period. His canvases turned cold, suffused with melancholy. He painted figures lost in thought, their elongated forms draped in sadness. La Vie, 1903, a haunting composition, depicted Casagemas in an ethereal, almost ghostly state, surrounded by images of suffering and tenderness. In The Old Guitarist, 1903-1904, a blind man clutched his instrument, his body twisted in despair, lost in a world of solitude. Blue dominated the palette, deep, sorrowful shades that seemed to weep from the canvas itself. But even in his grief, Picasso was evolving. He was absorbing the lessons of the past, El Greco's elongated forms, Goya's haunting darkness, the raw emotion of Van Gogh. Yet he was restless, searching for something more. And then, almost imperceptibly, his world began to change again. By 1904, his paintings began to warm. The blues softened, giving way to delicate pinks, gentle oranges. Figures of sorrow transformed into acrobats, harlequins, and circus performers, their fragile bodies imbued with grace. It was the birth of his Rose Period, a shift from despair to a quiet, wistful beauty. Montmartre's bohemian life had seeped into his art. He became fascinated by the saltimbanques, the wandering circus performers who lived on the edges of society. In Acrobat and Young Harlequin, 1905, a pair of performers sat in quiet contemplation, their expressions distant, lost in the poetry of their own existence. There was still sadness, but it was tinged with tenderness, a dreamlike nostalgia for a world that seemed just out of reach. It was during this time that Picasso met Fernande Olivier, a French artist and model who became his first great love. She was fiery, passionate, and as bohemian as the city itself. Their relationship was turbulent, filled with jealousy and obsession, but she became his muse, appearing in countless works from this period. Paris was now truly his home. He was no longer the young outsider from Spain. He had become part of the city's artistic bloodstream. He formed friendships with poets like Guillaume Apollinaire and painters like Henri Matisse, though their relationship was one of rivalry as much as camaraderie. Matisse was already an established master, a leader of the Fauvist movement, while Picasso was still emerging, but the two would push each other forward, each challenging the other's perception of what art could be. Then, in 1906, everything changed again. Picasso stumbled upon something that would ignite a revolution, something ancient yet radical. He discovered African and Iberian sculpture, artifacts of raw power and striking abstraction. Their simplified forms, their spiritual intensity, they fascinated him. He began to strip his figures down to their essence, reducing them to bold, angular shapes. He was on the verge of something new, something that would shake the very foundations of art. And so, in a cramped studio in Montmartre, surrounded by the scent of turpentine and unfinished canvases, Picasso began painting what would become one of the most shocking, revolutionary works in history, a painting that would mark the true birth of modern art. The air in Picasso's Montmartre studio was thick with the smell of linseed oil and drying paint. Crumpled sketches littered the wooden floor, and half-finished canvases leaned against the walls. But amidst this chaotic energy, something profound was taking shape. A painting unlike anything seen before, one that would shatter every convention of Western art. It began in 1906 with countless studies of nude figures and fragmented faces. He was drawing inspiration from African masks, Iberian sculptures, and ancient art that seemed to capture something raw, something unfiltered. Art had long been obsessed with beauty, with perspective, with harmony. But Picasso was after something else. He wanted to strip away the excess, to reach the very essence of human form. The result was Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, 1907. 5 female figures staring with eyes wide and unflinching, their bodies jagged, almost brutal. The traditional sense of perspective was gone. Some faces resembled African masks, others evoked the rigid forms of Iberian statues. It was violent, unsettling, a complete break from everything that had come before. When Picasso revealed the painting to his closest friends and colleagues, the reaction was shock. Even Matisse, his artistic rival, was disturbed, calling it an insult to painting. His friend André Derain reportedly said, "One day we shall find Picasso hanged behind his great canvas," but Picasso was undeterred. He sensed that he had crossed a threshold, even if the world wasn't ready for it. The painting remained in his studio for years, unexhibited, but its influence had already begun to ripple through the avant-garde. Something new had been born. It was Georges Braque, a fellow painter, who saw the potential in Picasso's radical approach. The two began working closely, experimenting with new ways of representing reality. They deconstructed objects, breaking them down into geometric shapes, flattening perspective, merging multiple viewpoints onto a single plane. A violin was no longer just a violin, it became a series of interlocking cubes, an abstract puzzle of light and shadow. This was the birth of Cubism. By 1908, the movement had fully taken form. Picasso and Braque worked side by side, creating paintings that baffled the art world. Houses at L'Estaque, Girl with a Mandolin, Violin and Candlestick, each work fragmented reality, challenging everything artists had been taught about depth, form, and representation. Cubism was not just a new style, it was a revolution. Traditional Renaissance perspective, which had guided painting for centuries, was completely abandoned. Instead of seeing an object from one fixed viewpoint, Picasso and Braque showed it from multiple angles at once. They were dissecting reality, reassembling it in ways the human eye had never witnessed before. Critics ridiculed their work. One newspaper mocked their paintings, describing them as little more than cubes, and thus the name stuck, Cubism. But the ridicule did not deter Picasso. He was now at the forefront of the most radical artistic movement in the world. Collectors like Gertrude Stein and art dealers in Paris and beyond were beginning to take notice. His fame was growing, his paintings selling. No longer the struggling, young artist of Montmartre, Picasso was becoming a force to be reckoned with. Yet even as Cubism evolved, moving into its analytical and synthetic phases, incorporating elements of collage and typography, Picasso remained restless. He had revolutionized art once, but he was not content to stop there. He never was. Then, in 1914, the world changed. The outbreak of World War I sent shockwaves through Europe. Many artists were drafted into service. The cafes of Montmartre emptied. The spirit of experimentation was overshadowed by the horrors of war. Picasso, a Spanish citizen, was not conscripted, but war cast its shadow over his work. His colors darkened, his forms became heavier, more somber. And as the years passed, his art began to shift yet again. A new chapter was about to begin, one that would take him beyond Cubism, beyond abstraction, into yet another reinvention of himself and his art. The war had reshaped the world, leaving scars on cities, on people, and on art itself. By 1917, Paris was no longer the same bohemian playground it had been before. Many of Picasso's friends were gone. Some had enlisted, others had fled. The excitement of Cubism had given way to a new reality, one of uncertainty, exhaustion, and the search for stability. During these years, Picasso's art took another unexpected turn. He moved away from the fractured, abstracted forms of Cubism and returned, at least in part, to a more classical approach. It was as if he were looking to the past for a sense of order in a chaotic world. His figures became more structured, his compositions more grounded. This shift was influenced by his travels to Italy, where he encountered the grandeur of Renaissance. Art, Michelangelo, Raphael, and classical sculpture left a deep impression on him. The result was a period often called his neoclassical phase, a time when he painted large, monumental figures that seemed almost sculpted from stone. Works like Three Women at the Spring, 1921, and Seated Woman, 1920, showed a newfound solidity, a return to harmony and balance. But Picasso was never one to stay in one place for long. Even as he explored classicism, another influence was brewing in his life, one that would drive him in a wildly different direction. Her name was Olga Koklova, a Russian ballet dancer with the Ballets Russes. Olga was elegant, disciplined, and everything that Picasso's previous lovers had not been. They met in 1917 while Picasso was working on set designs for Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Parade. The attraction was immediate, and soon they were inseparable. In 1918, they married, and for a brief moment, Picasso seemed to embrace bourgeois life. They lived in a fashionable apartment in Paris, socialized with the elite, and even had a son, Paolo, in 1921. His paintings from this time reflected this newfound stability. Portraits of Olga and their child depicted them in a tender, almost serene light. But Picasso was never meant for convention. The domestic life that Olga cherished soon began to suffocate him. He grew restless, his passion for her waning. By the early 1920s, his art once again began to shift, this time towards something raw, distorted, and surreal. It was the age of surrealism, a movement driven by dreams, the subconscious, and a rejection of reason. Though Picasso never fully joined the movement, his work resonated with its themes. His figures grew monstrous, exaggerated, their forms twisted in unnatural ways. This change was also fueled by a new love, a young woman named Marie-Thérèse Walter. Blonde, youthful, and full of vitality, she was everything that Olga was not. Their affair remained secret for years, but Picasso's paintings began to reflect a sensuality that could not be hidden. His portraits of Marie-Thérèse, soft, rounded, dreamlike, were a stark contrast to the strained, angular depictions of Olga. By the late 1920s, Picasso had fully abandoned the structured order of his neoclassical phase. Works like The Painter and His Model, 1927, and Large Nude in a Red Armchair, 1929, showed exaggerated melting forms, a blending of cubism with surrealist distortion. His marriage to Olga, meanwhile, was unraveling. She discovered the affair, and in 1935, after years of tension, she left him, though they never officially divorced. The separation plunged Picasso into an emotional and artistic crisis. He painted less, sketched obsessively, and withdrew from public life. But even in his darkest moments, Picasso's art never stopped evolving, and soon the world itself would demand something new from him. Because beyond the realm of personal turmoil, storm clouds were gathering over Europe once again. A new war was coming, one that would bring Picasso face to face with the horrors of the modern age, and from those horrors, he would create his most powerful, most political, and perhaps his most famous masterpiece. The 1930s were a decade of rising tension, both in Picasso's personal life and in the world around him. As Europe edged closer to war, Picasso found himself pulled into the political currents of the time. He had never been an openly political artist, but the brutality unfolding in his homeland, Spain, would change that forever. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War erupted. General Francisco Franco, backed by fascist forces, launched a coup against the Spanish Republic. The conflict quickly turned into a bloodbath. Villages were bombed, civilians were massacred, and Spain became a battleground for the ideologies tearing Europe apart. Fascism against democracy, tyranny against freedom. Picasso, though living in Paris, could not remain indifferent. He had always been proud of his Spanish roots, and the war deeply affected him. He was named the honorary director of the Prado Museum in Madrid, though he could do little as Spain descended into chaos. His art grew darker, more violent. The Weeping Woman, 1937, a series of portraits depicting a woman in anguish, reflected the pain and suffering of his people. But it was on April 26, 1937, that everything changed. That day, the small Basque town of Guernica was bombed by German and Italian warplanes, an attack ordered by Franco to crush Republican resistance. The bombing lasted for hours, reducing the town to rubble. Hundreds of civilians were killed, burned alive in the flames, buried beneath the debris. It was one of the first large-scale bombings of civilians in modern warfare, a horrifying preview of what was to come in World War II. When Picasso heard the news, he was devastated. He knew he had to respond not with words, but with the only weapon he had, his art. For weeks, he worked obsessively in his Paris studio. He filled sketchbooks with frantic studies, searching for the right forms to capture the horror of Guernica. The final painting, simply titled Guernica, was unveiled in June 1937. It was a vision of pure anguish, a massive mural, black, white, and gray, as if drained of life. At the center, a horse screamed in agony, its body twisted. A woman clutched her dead child, her mouth open in an endless cry. A bull, an ancient Spanish symbol, loomed over the chaos, watching impassively. Hands reached out, pleading, burning. There was no color, no relief. Only suffering, only pain. Guernica was not just a painting. It was a cry of protest, a condemnation of war itself. It stunned the world. Displayed at the 1937 Paris International Exposition, it became an emblem of the Republican cause, a rallying cry against fascism. But Picasso knew that paintings alone could not stop bombs. He refused to return to Franco's Spain, choosing to remain in exile in France. He became more openly political, aligning himself with the Communist Party, though he never let politics dictate his art. As World War II erupted, Picasso remained in Nazi-occupied Paris. The Gestapo visited his studio frequently, suspicious of his radical reputation. One officer, upon seeing a photo of Guernica, sneered, "Did you do this?" Picasso responded coldly, "No, you did." Though forbidden from exhibiting under the Nazi regime, Picasso continued to paint in secret. His work became even darker. His portraits, deformed and tormented, reflected the horrors of war. The Charnel House, 1944-45, painted after the liberation of Paris, depicted lifeless bodies piled together, their faces ghostly and unrecognizable. By 1945, the war had ended, but the world had changed forever. Picasso was now a legend, a symbol of resistance, of defiance in the face of tyranny. But he was also a man constantly reinventing himself. With the war behind him, he turned once more to something new, something unexpected. He was about to enter the final, most prolific phase of his life, one where joy, playfulness, and boundless creativity would define his work. As the war ended and the world slowly rebuilt itself, Picasso began to embrace a sense of freedom in his work that had been absent for years. The weight of political struggles, personal loss, and the horrors of war had shaped him, but now he was ready to create without the same burden. Picasso was in his 60s, and his art became a playground, untethered, spontaneous, and often joyful. In the late 1940s, Picasso's work shifted again. He was no longer the politically charged figure of the 1930s or the tortured soul of his earlier years. Instead, he embraced a new sense of liberation and playfulness, almost like a child rediscovering art for the first time. He began experimenting with ceramics, producing hundreds of works that blended classical themes with his unique abstract style. The pottery he created was free-flowing, vibrant, and often whimsical. Each piece seemed to embody his joy of creation, a celebration of life after years of turmoil. But Picasso wasn't just creating in one medium. He was exploring every possibility. His paintings from this time were filled with vibrant colors, flowing lines, and distorted forms. The bold shapes and figures that had defined his earlier work transformed into joyful compositions filled with energy. The artist was no longer bound by rules. His brushstrokes were wild, unrestrained, like the playful movements of a dancer. One of Picasso's favorite motifs during this period was the bull, a symbol that had appeared throughout his career. But now, the bull took on a new meaning. It was no longer a figure of death and destruction, as in Guernica. Instead, it became a symbol of vitality and strength. The bull was a celebration of the very essence of life, a testament to the resilience of both the artist and the world around him. During this period, Picasso's work became widely celebrated once more. He was invited to exhibit at major galleries, and his art began to receive international acclaim. But the man who had once been at the cutting edge of revolutionary art was now revered as an icon, an artist who had shaped the 20th century. But despite his global fame, Picasso's personal life was still as tumultuous as ever. He had been married twice, had numerous lovers, and fathered children by different women. His relationship with Marie-Thérèse Walter had ended, and he had moved on to a passionate affair with Françoise Gillot, a painter 20 years his junior. In 1949, Françoise gave birth to two children, Claude and Paloma, and Picasso seemed to settle into a quieter phase of his life. But as always, Picasso was never content to rest on his laurels. In the 1950s, Picasso's creativity only seemed to grow more intense. He began to explore a new obsession, reinterpreting the works of the old masters. He painted reinterpretations of Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez, using his own signature style to deconstruct the famous painting, turning the figures into abstract forms. These reinterpretations were not just homages to the great masters of the past. They were a statement of Picasso's own creative authority. He was now standing side by side with the giants of art history, reimagining their works as if to say, "This is mine now." Despite the acclaim, the recognition, and the endless accolades, Picasso's work was still driven by a need to push boundaries. He was constantly evolving, always searching for something new, something uncharted. He had moved beyond the limitations of any one style, and now in his later years, he could create freely without fear of judgment. However, the end was approaching. In the early 1970s, Picasso's health began to decline. He continued to paint and draw, but he also became more reflective, more introspective. In the twilight years of his life, Picasso looked back on his long career with a sense of achievement, but also with a deep melancholy. His life had been one of constant reinvention, and he had shaped the course of modern art in a way no one else had. Yet, as always, there was the drive to create. There was still something left to say. In April 1973, Picasso died at the age of 91, leaving behind a legacy that would forever change the world of art. His influence stretched across movements and generations, from the early Cubists to the Surrealists and beyond. His work, spanning painting, sculpture, ceramics, printmaking, and even design, was not just an artistic revolution. It was a testament to the endless possibilities of human expression. And as the world looked back on Picasso's life, it became clear that he had done more than create art. He had challenged the very idea of what art could be. Through his boundless curiosity and unrelenting drive, Picasso had shown that there was no end to creativity, no boundaries to human imagination. Picasso's life was a masterpiece in itself, a work of art that could never be fully understood, but would continue to inspire generations of artists to come. He had lived, loved, and created with passion, and in doing so, he had left an indelible mark on the world. Picasso's death in 1973 marked the end of an era in the art world, but his influence never truly faded. In fact, it only grew stronger in the years that followed. His legacy was one of constant innovation, his ability to reinvent himself over and over again, never allowing himself to be confined by the expectations of others or by his own past. Even after his passing, Picasso's name remained synonymous with genius, with creativity, and with the breaking of boundaries. In the years following his death, his works were celebrated across the globe. Museums and galleries dedicated entire wings to his art, and exhibitions of his work were held in cities from New York to Tokyo, from London to Buenos Aires. Picasso's name became a symbol of modern art itself, and his paintings, sculptures, and ceramics were studied, analyzed, and admired by artists and critics alike. Yet, while Picasso's legacy was being cemented in the art world, his influence began to extend far beyond the confines of galleries and museums. The world of popular culture began to embrace his work, and his distinctive style began to appear in unexpected places. From fashion to advertising, from music videos to album covers, Picasso's influence could be seen everywhere. His imagery was no longer confined to the world of high art. It was part of the cultural fabric, woven into the very language of modern life. But even as his work became increasingly celebrated, Picasso's personal life continued to generate interest and intrigue. His relationships, his passions, and his relentless pursuit of new creative endeavors fascinated the public, adding to the mythos surrounding his name. Throughout his life, Picasso had been a man of contradictions, a revolutionary and a traditionalist, a lover and a loner, a man who never ceased to question the very nature of art. In his later years, as his health deteriorated, he grew more reflective, looking back on his extraordinary career with a sense of accomplishment and regret. He once said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child." This statement captured the essence of Picasso's philosophy. He believed that true artistic freedom came not from following established conventions, but from the willingness to break them, to embrace the unknown, and to find beauty in the raw, unfiltered expression of the self. His art was never about perfection. It was about the pursuit of truth, the need to convey the deepest emotions and experiences in the most direct, unmediated way. In his final years, Picasso's work reflected this sense of unending exploration. The themes that had preoccupied him throughout his life, the human form, the complexities of relationships, the anguish of war, the joy of creation, were revisited, reinterpreted, and reimagined. His late works, such as The Yvonne and The Mirror, 1970, and The Three Dancers, 1972, were imbued with a sense of freedom and spontaneity that reflected the artist's desire to continue to push boundaries even as he neared the end of his life. As Picasso's health continued to decline, he retreated from public life, choosing to spend more time with his family in his final years. His relationship with his children, Claude and Paloma, had always been a complex one, his intense, creative drive often overshadowing his role as a father. Yet, in his later years, Picasso seemed to find peace with his family, spending time with them at his villa in the south of France. His studio was a sanctuary, a place where he could continue to create, even as the world around him began to change. In the months leading up to his death, Picasso's work had reached new heights of expression. It was as if he was making a final statement, a declaration of his enduring belief in the power of art to transcend time, place, and circumstance. He had lived through 2 world wars, the Spanish Civil War, political upheavals, and personal tragedies. Yet he had never stopped creating, never stopped searching for the next idea, the next form, the next way to capture the essence of the world around him. On April 8, 1973, Picasso passed away at the age of 91, leaving behind a body of work that would continue to inspire and influence generations to come. His death marked the end of a chapter in the history of art, but his legacy lived on. The world had lost a titan of creativity, but Picasso's influence was far from over. In the years following his death, Picasso's work continued to be celebrated, dissected, and reinterpreted. His paintings were not just admired, they were studied, analyzed, and revered as some of the most important works of the 20th century. But it wasn't just his paintings that left a lasting impact. Picasso's ideas about the nature of art, about breaking free from tradition, about challenging the status quo, about finding beauty in chaos, continued to resonate with artists around the world. Even today, Picasso's legacy remains as powerful as ever. His works hang in the greatest museums and galleries. His name is synonymous with innovation, and his influence can be seen in the work of countless artists who continue to push the boundaries of what art can be. But beyond the fame, the accolades, and the recognition, Picasso's true legacy lies in his unshakable commitment to creativity. He never stopped experimenting, never stopped questioning, and never stopped pushing the limits of what was possible. In doing so, he transformed the world of art, and in turn, he transformed the world itself. For Picasso, art was not just a way to make a living, it was a way to live. His life was his art, and his art was his life. Through his work, he showed us that there are no boundaries to creativity, no limits to what the human spirit can achieve. Picasso's art will forever be a testament to the power of the imagination, a celebration of the endless possibilities that exist when we dare to create. As the decades passed following Picasso's death, his work continued to shape and influence the world of art in ways that no one could have predicted. His legacy was no longer just about the work itself, it was about the revolution he sparked in the world of artistic expression. He had pushed the boundaries of what art could be, and his influence spread far beyond the confines of the art world into every corner of culture. One of the most remarkable aspects of Picasso's legacy was the diversity of his work. Unlike many artists, Picasso never remained loyal to a single style or medium for long. He constantly evolved, changing the way he approached both his subjects and his tools. He was not confined by the rigid standards of any one movement or time. His genius was in his adaptability, his ability to constantly reinvent himself, and his refusal to settle for the familiar. This eclecticism became one of Picasso's defining traits. He was a master of many forms: painting, sculpture, ceramics, printmaking, and more. He could take any medium and make it his own, whether he was working with oil paints on canvas, creating surreal and symbolic images in lithography, or experimenting with the ancient craft of ceramics. His ability to work across so many mediums allowed him to create a rich and varied body of work that continues to captivate audiences to this day. In the years following his death, it became increasingly clear that Picasso had been more than just an artist. He had been a visionary, a person who had changed the way the world viewed creativity. His influence was felt not only by fellow artists, but by architects, designers, musicians, and filmmakers. His work had become a touchstone for the entire world of visual culture. The 1980s and 1990s saw a renewed interest in Picasso. Major retrospective exhibitions were held in prestigious institutions such as the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Musée Picasso in Paris, and the Tate Gallery in London. These exhibitions brought his work to new generations of art lovers and offered fresh perspectives on his oeuvre. art historians began to uncover new dimensions of his artistic process, shedding light on his artistic evolution and the ways in which his life experiences had shaped his work. Yet Picasso's influence was not limited to the art world. He became an icon of popular culture. His distinctive visual style, a combination of bold shapes, fractured perspectives, and abstract forms, was adapted into countless commercial designs, from advertisements to fashion to architecture. His image, with its piercing gaze and intense features, became instantly recognizable, cementing his place in the cultural lexicon. But it was not just his visual language that had permeated culture, it was his philosophy. Picasso's rejection of convention and his insistence on constant reinvention resonated with a world that was increasingly embracing change and upheaval. His idea that art could never be static, that it should constantly evolve and reflect the world around it, became a guiding principle for many contemporary artists. The concept of art as a process was perhaps one of his most important contributions to the field. His constant experimentation with different forms, his willingness to break away from traditional approaches, became a model for artists everywhere. As the 21st century arrived, Picasso's impact was still being felt. New generations of artists took inspiration from his fearlessness, his drive, and his passion for pushing boundaries. His work continued to be dissected, analyzed, and interpreted in new ways. Yet perhaps the most enduring aspect of his legacy was the way in which he made art accessible. Picasso didn't just create art for the elite or the intellectuals, he created art for everyone. His work was bold, immediate, and universal. Picasso's ability to take complex, often chaotic emotions and transform them into visual language that anyone could understand was part of his genius. Whether he was depicting the anguish of war in Guernica or the innocence of childhood in his later ceramics, Picasso's work spoke to the heart. His art was raw and powerful, and it communicated truths about the human experience that transcended time and place. As time marches on, Picasso's art remains as relevant as ever. His ability to navigate the complexities of human existence, to confront the darkest aspects of life while celebrating its joys, ensured that his work would stand the test of time. His influence can be seen in the work of contemporary artists across the globe, from painters and sculptors to graphic designers and street artists. His legacy is woven into the very fabric of modern art. In many ways, Picasso's life was a mirror of the century he lived through, a century of profound change, of wars and revolutions, of constant reinvention and upheaval. Picasso captured the essence of that century in his art, and in doing so, he helped to define the modern era. His work is a record of a turbulent time, a visual history of the 20th century. And yet, despite the historical and political contexts of his work, Picasso's art remains timeless. It speaks to the universal experiences of love, loss, joy, and pain that define the human condition. Even in death, Picasso's voice continues to resonate. His work endures not just because of his mastery of technique, but because of his unwavering commitment to the freedom of expression. Picasso once said, "Every act of creation is first an act of destruction." And in that statement lies the essence of his legacy. To create is to break free from the past, to tear down the old, to make room for the new. Picasso was a creator in the truest sense of the word. He built and rebuilt the world of art, leaving a foundation upon which future generations could stand. For as long as people continue to make art, Picasso's influence will be felt. His spirit will live on in the bold strokes of a painter's brush, in the sculptor's chisel, in the ceramicist's wheel. Picasso's legacy is not just in the works he left behind, it is in the ongoing act of creation itself. He remains one of the greatest artists in history, and his story is one of continuous transformation. the 21st century saw a renewed and deeper examination of Picasso's work, driven by the rapid evolution of the global art world. With more emphasis on multiculturalism and digital innovations, the boundaries Picasso had pushed seemed less like historical milestones and more like living principles that contemporary artists could adapt and use in new ways. Even as the art world diversified, Picasso's ideas continued to resonate with new generations who sought to deconstruct norms and create art that represented not only the complexities of their times, but also a shared sense of humanity. In this new landscape, Picasso's influence was not merely a thing of nostalgia, it was a vital, thriving force. Artists, designers, and creators across the world took from his visual language, adapting it to the digital age. The cubism Picasso pioneered could now be seen in graphic design and digital art, where geometric abstraction became a way to break down visual realities into their most basic deconstructed forms. Just as Picasso had broken the human form into fragmented shapes, modern creators, with the help of digital tools, were able to recreate his fragmented world in the digital canvas, offering a new way of interpreting the fragmented world we live in. Despite the fact that Picasso's art is studied extensively, the real power of his work lies in its ability to provoke new interpretations and discussions. Just as Picasso had sought to break away from the formal constraints of classical art and academic styles, contemporary artists have also sought ways to break from what came before. In doing so, they often return to Picasso's works, rediscovering the elements that made his art so revolutionary. One particularly powerful testament to Picasso's legacy came in the form of digital reinterpretations. Artists who were born long after Picasso's death used his works as the foundation for their own explorations of modern technologies. From augmented reality to virtual reality, Picasso's influence was reimagined in a tech-savvy world. His work, which once belonged solely to galleries and museums, was now brought to life in completely new ways, allowing audiences to experience his art as an interactive, immersive journey. The digital world gave Picasso's innovative visions a renewed context while also preserving them for future generations to experience in ways that he could never have imagined. Picasso's famous works like Guernica, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and The Weeping Woman continue to speak to a vast array of contemporary social issues. Picasso had always been an artist attuned to the pain and joys of his era. In Guernica, he expressed the horror of the Spanish Civil War, its chaotic violence, and the devastation it wreaked on innocent lives. The piece became a symbol not only of the war, but of the resilience of humanity in the face of tragedy. Decades after Picasso painted it, Guernica was still used in protest as a powerful tool to raise awareness for political movements and wars. Its timeless message, its chaotic and tragic beauty, carried the weight of the ages. Similarly, Picasso's work as an artist, activist, and intellectual was ever present in conversations surrounding war and human rights, especially in the wake of the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and the ongoing struggles in the Middle East. His work inspired generations of artists who understood the power of using one's art as a tool for social change. Picasso's love life also continued to fascinate the public. His relationships with women had always been part of his mythos, his many wives, lovers, and muses. Each relationship had, in its way, left an indelible mark on his work. From the radiant works inspired by his first wife, Olga Kokhlova, to the intense, tortured imagery driven by his affair with Dora Maar, Picasso's emotional life was embedded in his art. In his paintings, portraits, and sculptures, he brought these women to life in an often unsettling, raw, and fragmented form. His portrayal of women was a complex, shifting theme, reflecting his own inner conflicts, his joys, and his disappointments. These portraits continued to spark debate over his views on women and his role as a man and an artist in a society that, by today's standards, was much more complicated in its relationships between the sexes. The public's understanding of Picasso's emotional landscape was shaped not only by his work, but by his own statements, interviews, and accounts from those who knew him. In many ways, Picasso's life became inseparable from his art. His personal relationships, his friendships, and even his battles with his own identity and legacy were absorbed into the conversation about his creative output. While some may view his personal life as controversial or even problematic, others argue that it was an inseparable part of the genius of Picasso, his relentless drive, his constant reinvention, his tormented quest for creative freedom that could not be tamed by the norms of his time. Today, in the art world, Picasso's legacy is carried on by institutions such as the Musée Picasso in Paris, the Museo Picasso in Barcelona, and the Museo Picasso Malaga, where his works continue to be displayed and studied. These institutions not only honor his life, but also serve as living spaces where new generations of art students, curators, and critics learn from Picasso's methods, techniques, and ideologies. These museums, along with countless retrospectives and exhibitions, ensure that Picasso's influence remains a vibrant part of the conversation around contemporary art. Picasso's impact, however, went beyond the institutional and academic worlds. He was an icon whose life and work touched all forms of popular culture. Whether it was music, fashion, film, or advertising, his art permeated all aspects of modern life. Musicians like David Bowie and the Beatles drew inspiration from Picasso's surreal forms and revolutionary aesthetics, while designers from Yves Saint Laurent to Jean-Paul Gaultier made use of his bold shapes and color schemes. Even in the world of cinema, directors like Jean-Luc Godard incorporated Picasso's fragmented, disjointed visual approach into films, pushing the medium of film to embrace the same kind of abstraction Picasso championed in his art. For those artists looking to push against traditional boundaries, Picasso's words remain a beacon of creative freedom. It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child. Picasso's belief in the untamed freedom of childlike creativity continues to inspire those who feel constrained by rules, conventions, and expectations. His career offers an enduring lesson about the possibilities that exist when an artist is willing to break away from all constraints, to step into the unknown, and to embrace the power of reinvention. Picasso's art continues to inspire us today, and his legacy shows us that creativity is a lifelong journey of discovery, a journey where every step, every experiment, and every failure is as significant as the final masterpiece. As the art world evolved into the 21st century, Picasso's works were reinterpreted with a new sense of urgency. His vision, which had once been seen as revolutionary, was now being placed within the context of a world that itself was undergoing monumental change. In a society increasingly defined by technology, global communication, and social movements, Picasso's approach to breaking boundaries took on even greater significance. His artistic journey, filled with constant reinvention, mirrored the quest for personal and societal transformation. One aspect of Picasso's life that has consistently captured the public's imagination is the fact that, unlike many other artists, his works never truly cease to evolve. The notion that an artist reaches a definitive style or phase is foreign to Picasso's legacy. He never settled. He never rested on his laurels. From his early years spent in Spain to his final days in the south of France, Picasso never stopped exploring, experimenting, and reinventing himself. His versatility was not simply a tool, it was a fundamental part of who he was as a person and an artist. With the internet becoming the primary mode of global communication, the early 21st century allowed Picasso's works to be shared more widely and more rapidly than ever before. High-resolution images of his paintings, sculptures, and sketches were disseminated across social media, websites, and digital galleries. Not only did this bring Picasso's masterpieces to the fingertips of millions, but it also opened up new forms of interaction and engagement with his art. For the first time in history, his work became a part of the public consciousness in a way that was instantaneous, pervasive, and global. People could access and discuss his paintings from all corners of the world, generating new conversations about their meaning and their relevance in today's world. In particular, the younger generations of artists took advantage of the digital age to draw new inspiration from Picasso's work. The rise of digital art platforms, such as Instagram and Behance, has allowed contemporary creators to experiment with Picasso's ideas in ways that he could not have foreseen. The tools that artists have at their disposal today, 3D modeling, software, digital painting programs, and augmented reality, have enabled them to engage with Picasso's legacy in a more interactive way. Picasso's fragmented cubism, his radical abstraction, and his daring use of color have been reinterpreted and adapted to the digital canvas, allowing for a fresh take on his ideas. These reinterpretations don't simply copy Picasso's style, they explore the same questions he did. How can art communicate the complexity of the human condition? How can we push beyond the conventional to express new realities? What happens when we fragment reality, not just as a way of representing it, but as a means of redefining it? Picasso's ability to represent multiple viewpoints, his breaking down of objects and figures into basic shapes and forms, remains a powerful metaphor for the fluidity of modern life. His art represents the way in which everything, society, relationships, identities, are constantly being redefined and reshaped. Despite the ever-changing art landscape, the reverence for Picasso's contributions has never diminished. His works continue to hold pride of place in major international collections, and they are frequently showcased in prominent art museums. Guernica, his powerful anti-war masterpiece, is permanently housed in the Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid, where it continues to be a profound symbol of political resistance and the cost of war. Its resonance, even decades after its creation, speaks to the continuing relevance of Picasso's work in addressing the social and political challenges of the modern world. Picasso's ability to address universal themes in an unflinching, uncompromising way has ensured that his work remains as pertinent today as it was when it was first created. His paintings were not just decorative objects. They were charged with emotion, with meaning, and with the possibility of change. They were reflections of his times, yes, but also of the human condition. Picasso understood that art was not merely for pleasure, it was for engagement. Art should provoke, question, and challenge. His approach to portraiture, for example, was not just an exploration of the human form. Picasso used portraiture as a means of delving into the essence of his subjects. Through his distinctive visual language, he captured the multiple facets of a person's character, not simply the surface appearance. Whether it was his iconic portraits of Dora Maar, his lover and muse, or his haunting depictions of his ex-wife, Jacqueline Roque, Picasso never settled for traditional portraiture. His subjects were often distorted, fragmented, and reassembled, suggesting the complexity and shifting nature of human identity. Picasso's exploration of the human figure extended far beyond his portraits. He used his own body as a subject throughout his career. The self-portrait was a recurring motif in his work, one that allowed him to interrogate his own identity and his role as an artist. In his later years, Picasso's self-portraits became more introspective and reflective. These works conveyed a sense of wisdom, of looking inward to grapple with the passage of time and the evolution of his own consciousness. His self-portraits of his later years reflect an artist fully aware of his place in history, one who knew that his legacy was being written with every brushstroke. Picasso's life and work were marked by an insatiable curiosity. Whether it was his time in Paris, his experimentation with surrealism, or his embrace of African art, Picasso was always seeking out new influences and experiences. He was never satisfied with staying in one place, either physically or artistically. His travels, his relationships, and his constant search for new ideas contributed to his unique ability to synthesize diverse influences into a single cohesive artistic vision. Even as Picasso's work became more abstract, more simplified in form, it remained emotionally potent. He had always been interested in how art could communicate deep emotional truths. His work may have become more abstract over time, but the core of his art, the ability to express raw emotion, to confront human suffering and joy, to probe the intricacies of life, remained. His art had become more than just images. It had become a language, one that spoke directly to the soul. At the heart of Picasso's legacy lies an unwavering commitment to creative freedom. He once said, "It took me a long time to become young." Picasso's life was a testament to the idea that creativity has no age. His late works, in which he explored themes of childhood innocence, youth, and vitality, serve as a reminder that the pursuit of creativity is a lifelong endeavor. Creativity, Picasso believed, was a force that transcended time and age, and he exemplified this throughout his life. As Picasso's legacy endures, it continues to inspire not just artists, but anyone who dares to think differently, to challenge the status quo, and to push the boundaries of their own creative expression. Picasso may have been a product of his time, but his work transcended the time in which it was created. He gave the world a new way of seeing, a new way of thinking, and a new way of being. His art will forever serve as a reminder that creativity is boundless, and that, in the words of Picasso himself, every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. As we enter the latter part of Picasso's life, the 1960s and beyond, his world continued to shift and evolve. By this time, Picasso had long cemented his place as one of the greatest artists in history. But rather than slowing down or resting on his laurels, he entered into what could be described as his final, most productive phase. It was during these later years that Picasso's work became increasingly more abstract, more experimental, and more reflective of his internal world. By the 1960s, Picasso had left behind much of the youthful exploration of form and color that characterized his earlier work. He had grown older, more reflective, and more aware of the passage of time. His work during this period explored a deeper psychological space, revealing his personal struggles, his sense of mortality, and his desire for renewal. His late works were infused with a sense of urgency, as though Picasso was in constant dialogue with his own legacy and with the world around him. He sought to reinvigorate his artistic practice by revisiting themes from his past, reinterpreting them through a fresh lens. His focus shifted from the external world to the internal, from the political to the deeply personal. Picasso's later work also embraced the idea of reinvention. He constantly found new ways to challenge himself and stretch the boundaries of his creative potential. This relentless desire for innovation, for breaking down old barriers, was visible in his sculptures, prints, and ceramics. His experimentation with different mediums was a continuation of the same impulse that had fueled his earlier explorations of Cubism, Surrealism, and his other iconic periods. Picasso was not content to stay confined to one medium or one form. He sought to transcend the limitations of his own artistic practice. Among his most interesting later works are his sculptures, which showcase his ongoing drive to reinvent his own visual vocabulary. Picasso began working in the medium of ceramics and sculpture in the 1950s and 1960s, creating a body of work that is as innovative as it is diverse. He embraced the idea of transforming everyday objects into works of art, using materials like clay, metal, and found objects. His sculptures are often characterized by their playful, whimsical forms, yet they carry a deep emotional weight, reflecting Picasso's personal life and philosophy. In a sense, Picasso's sculptures served as a distillation of his overall artistic journey, combining abstraction, surrealism, and his lifelong commitment to breaking free from artistic convention. Another defining aspect of Picasso's late years was his return to classical themes and iconography. In his final works, Picasso revisited the old masters, paying tribute to the legacy of artists like Rembrandt and Velázquez. He reinterpreted their classical subjects, reimagining them in his own fragmented, modernist style. These works show a deep respect for the history of art, while also reaffirming Picasso's position as an artist who was always looking forward, constantly evolving and reshaping the artistic canon. His engagement with classical traditions, alongside his experimentation with new forms, was a testament to his creative energy and his refusal to be bound by the past. However, as Picasso entered his later years, he was also grappling with personal loss and the inevitable realities of aging. The 1970s were marked by the death of his beloved muse, Jacqueline Roca, with whom he had spent the last 2 decades of his life. Jacqueline had been Picasso's final wife and the subject of many of his late works. Her death in 1986 deeply affected him, and the sadness and grief that accompanied this loss were evident in his work during these years. Many of his final paintings and sketches were infused with an intensity and urgency that reflected both the passing of time and his personal struggles. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, Picasso remained a creative force. He continued to work relentlessly, producing an astonishing number of works until his death. The sheer volume of work he created during his final years is staggering. He was still painting, sculpting, and drawing up until his last breath. His final paintings, marked by strong, vivid colors, chaotic lines, and fragmented figures, reaffirmed his place in art history as a master of reinvention, of transformation, and of defiance against the conventions of his time. Picasso passed away on April 8, 1973, at the age of 91. His death marked the end of an era in art history. The world lost one of its greatest geniuses, but Picasso's influence continued to reverberate across the art world, shaping the future of modern and contemporary art. In the years following his death, Picasso's legacy only grew stronger, and his works continued to command some of the highest prices ever seen at auction. His art became a symbol of the 20th century itself, reflecting the turbulence, complexity, and transformation that defined the century. In the aftermath of Picasso's death, his work became even more integrated into the cultural fabric of the world. The Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Musée Picasso in Paris, and other institutions around the globe mounted major retrospectives of his work, solidifying his place as a monumental figure in the history of art. These exhibitions not only highlighted the breadth and depth of his artistic achievements, but also brought attention to the continuing relevance of Picasso's ideas and innovations in the modern world. Picasso's art inspired generations of artists, critics, and art lovers. From pop artists like Andy Warhol to abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock, artists across the globe were deeply influenced by Picasso's daring and experimental spirit. Even today, his influence can be seen in the work of contemporary artists, many of whom continue to draw on Picasso's techniques, his disregard for convention, and his willingness to explore the emotional and psychological depths of the human experience. In the decades since his death, many have come to view Picasso not just as a revolutionary artist, but as a symbol of the creative spirit itself. His life story, marked by personal hardships, artistic triumphs, and an unyielding commitment to pushing the boundaries of art, serves as a reminder of the power of artistic vision and the importance of staying true to one's creative instincts. Today, Picasso's work stands as an enduring testament to the potential of art to transform both the artist and the viewer. His legacy remains an essential part of the cultural dialogue, reminding us of the importance of experimentation, innovation, and above all, the freedom to create. His art continues to challenge us to question the world around us, to break free from conventional thinking, and to embrace the power of art to express the complexities of the human condition. In the words of Picasso himself, the purpose of art is washing the dust of daily life off our souls. And through his art, Picasso has done exactly that. He has washed the dust of history from our eyes, giving us the clarity to see the world in new and unexpected ways. As Picasso's life and work continued to be celebrated long after his passing, it became clear that his legacy transcended the walls of galleries and museums. His influence on the broader culture remained profound, shaping not just visual art, but literature, film, and the way we think about creativity itself. Through his boundless innovation, Picasso had shown the world that art was not confined to traditional boundaries. It was a space for free expression, for questioning the norms, and for exploring the most fundamental aspects of the human experience. In the decades following his death, the notion of the Picasso myth began to take shape. His life was, in itself, a compelling narrative, a story of a young prodigy rising from humble beginnings, a passionate and often controversial figure, an artist who defied expectations and redefined the rules of art over and over again. Picasso's personal life, his tumultuous relationships, his intense passion, his profound loneliness, and his tireless creativity was often as captivating as his art. His relationships with women in particular have become a key part of the Picasso story, with many of his muses playing central roles in his artistic evolution. The way in which these women influenced his work and, in turn, were immortalized in his paintings, drawings, and sculptures has remained a topic of both admiration and critique. His complex relationships with his muses, lovers, and wives, whether it was the haunting portraits of Fernand Olivier, the radical reinterpretations of Dora Maar, or the affectionate depictions of Jacqueline Roquet, reflect a multifaceted and often contradictory understanding of love, beauty, and the feminine form. Picasso's portrayal of women in his art has drawn considerable attention, with some seeing his works as expressions of deep reverence for female power, and others as a more problematic exploration of power dynamics. Nevertheless, the women in his life were central to his artistic practice, and many art historians argue that his romantic relationships were key to understanding the emotional depth and psychological complexity of his later work. Through the lens of modern-day feminism, Picasso's relationships with women are often viewed critically, reflecting the cultural and societal norms of his time. Yet his ability to transform these complex and sometimes painful dynamics into powerful works of art remains undeniable. In many ways, Picasso's exploration of relationships, through both his personal life and his art, was a way of confronting the complexity of human existence. His depictions of women, often fragmented and distorted, reflected not just physical appearances, but also emotional truths. Through the lens of Cubism, he represented a world in which all perspectives were valid, and every facet of a person's identity, especially that of a woman, could be viewed from multiple angles. But beyond his relationships, Picasso's work in the public sphere also challenged the prevailing social and political attitudes of his time. His art often addressed larger issues, including war, poverty, and human suffering. Guernica, one of his most famous works, stands as a monumental, condemnation of the Spanish Civil War, and the devastation of war in general. The painting's visceral depiction of violence and chaos resonates as a universal cry against the horrors of conflict. The painting became a symbol of resistance, its stark forms and twisted figures echoing the anguish of a people torn apart by war. It is a reminder of Picasso's belief that art must engage with the world, that it should not shy away from uncomfortable truths. His involvement in political activism also shaped his legacy. Picasso was an outspoken advocate for peace, joining the French Communist Party in the late 1940s. While his political affiliations were controversial and his support for the Communist Party was often met with criticism, Picasso remained steadfast in his beliefs. He saw art not just as a form of personal expression, but as a tool for social and political change. His political views were expressed not just through his art, but also through his actions. He participated in numerous demonstrations and protests throughout his life, and his works often carried an overtly political message. Whether it was his 1945 painting La Joie de Vivre, with its vibrant depiction of human celebration, or the more somber The Charnel House from 1944, Picasso's work consistently confronted the injustices of his time. While Picasso's art and activism often made him a figure of contention, his influence on the art world and beyond is undeniable. His works have inspired countless artists, from fellow painters to sculptors, filmmakers, and writers. Artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat, who emerged in the 1980s, drew on Picasso's boldness, his willingness to break down artistic conventions, and his ability to represent both the beauty and the trauma of the human experience. In the world of cinema, directors like Woody Allen and Alfred Hitchcock have cited Picasso's work as an influence on their storytelling techniques, particularly in terms of how they frame the human figure and emotions. The spirit of Picasso's innovation continues to be a driving force in contemporary art. Artists today are still grappling with the same questions Picasso explored. How can we represent the complexities of human life? How can we break free from traditional modes of representation? How can we challenge the way we see the world and one another? These are questions Picasso asked, and the answers he found are still relevant. Today, his paintings, sculptures, and ceramics continue to be held in high regard, with his works featured in major collections and exhibitions around the world. His pieces are celebrated not only for their beauty, but also for the profound insights they offer into the human condition. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, for example, remains a touchstone for understanding the development of modern art, while works like The Weeping Woman and Guernica continue to speak powerfully about the darker aspects of the human experience. His legacy is both personal and universal, an exploration of individual identity, as well as a reflection of the turbulent world he lived in. The more time passes, the clearer it becomes that Picasso's art was not just a product of his time, it was a window into the future. His willingness to break boundaries, to question the status quo, and to push the limits of artistic expression has left an indelible mark on the world. In many ways, Picasso's art is not just a legacy of the past, but an ongoing conversation, one that challenges each new generation to see the world in new ways and to embrace the infinite possibilities of creativity. As the 21st century unfolded, Picasso's influence did not wane. In fact, his role in shaping the trajectory of modern and contemporary art only grew stronger. His legacy became even more deeply embedded in global culture. His works, not just displayed in galleries, but celebrated as symbols of artistic freedom, revolution, and innovation. The world continued to look back at his vast body of work, finding new layers of meaning with each passing decade. The notion of Picasso as an artist who transcended genres and defied categorization became even more pronounced as the decades passed. His ability to merge different styles and mediums, his unrelenting experimentation, and his willingness to explore themes of identity, memory, and politics, left an undeniable mark on every corner of the art world. With each of Picasso's periods, from the Blue Period to Cubism, Surrealism, and beyond, he had left an artistic blueprint that artists today continue to reference and build upon. One of the ways Picasso's influence continued to manifest was through the re-examination of his work in the context of global art movements. In the 1990s and early 2000s, a growing number of contemporary artists began to revisit his legacy in new and exciting ways. From street art to digital media, Picasso's approach to form, color, and space continued to resonate across disciplines. His ability to express emotion and abstract ideas through simple yet powerful shapes and colors inspired artists to push boundaries in their own practices. The visual language Picasso created was no longer confined to the gallery walls, but instead found its way into the streets, advertisements, and even the digital spaces where new generations of artists were emerging. One of the most significant ways Picasso's legacy lives on is in the reinterpretation of his artistic philosophy. Picasso believed that every artist should remain a student, constantly learning and evolving throughout their lives. His relentless pursuit of new techniques and forms, even in his later years, became an embodiment of the idea that artistic growth never truly stops. He was an artist whose practice was dynamic and ever-changing, rejecting the notion that an artist should ever settle into a single fixed identity. This philosophy resonated deeply with artists of the contemporary era, many of whom embraced the fluidity of their own creative processes and continuously sought out new ways to express themselves. His impact also extended into the world of art. Education, with Picasso's work serving as a foundational reference point in schools, universities, and ateliers around the world. Art students, particularly in modern painting and sculpture, still study Picasso's techniques, the way he broke down and deconstructed forms, the way he used abstraction to evoke deep emotional and intellectual responses. Picasso's approach to teaching himself and his ongoing experimentation with form and perspective influenced generations of artists to not just imitate, but to challenge and redefine artistic traditions. In many ways, Picasso's life serves as a testament to the idea that art is not just about technique, but about the desire to continually see the world in new ways. Beyond academia and the art world, Picasso's image as a public figure, an icon of artistic genius, was cemented. His face, with its striking features and trademark intense gaze, became as recognizable as his artwork. Picasso's ability to craft his own persona, to both embody and perpetuate the idea of the tortured artist, was part of his genius. This self-crafted myth made him not just an artist, but a symbol of creativity's boundless power. The public, captivated by his passionate nature, his endless curiosity, and his ability to reinvent himself, embraced Picasso as a kind of modern-day cultural hero. Through interviews, exhibitions, and personal appearances, Picasso cultivated an air of mystery and intrigue, making his every move a subject of fascination. Picasso's reach also extended into politics, with his art remaining a powerful tool for social change and protest. His works continued to serve as a reminder of the atrocities of war, the injustice of oppression, and the beauty that art can bring to a world in turmoil. Guernica, in particular, remained one of the most significant symbols of resistance against violence and war. It was displayed in various global locations throughout the years, including the United Nations building, where it served as a stark reminder of the horrors of conflict. In the world of contemporary art auctions, Picasso's works still command some of the highest prices ever seen. His paintings and sculptures have repeatedly broken records, making him not only one of the most influential artists in history, but also one of the wealthiest. His works, with their historical and cultural Significance are seen as prized treasures, timeless pieces that transcend generations. Even in a market that constantly shifts, Picasso's work remains as relevant and valuable as ever, and his influence continues to be felt in art collections around the globe. Even in his later years, Picasso demonstrated an almost prophetic understanding of the way art would evolve. He understood that art could and should be anything it needed to be: playful, political, abstract, figurative, or emotional. His fearlessness in pushing beyond established norms and his constant willingness to take risks with new techniques and mediums set the stage for the future of art. His influence is felt not only in the work of other painters, but in sculptors, photographers, filmmakers, and conceptual artists. Picasso's own evolution as an artist demonstrated that there is no end point in art, only constant change and discovery. As the art world continues to evolve, Picasso remains a central figure in the discussion about the role of art in society. His legacy is so entrenched in the fabric of modern and contemporary art that it is impossible to imagine the world without him. He reshaped the way we think about painting, sculpture, and even art itself. The question now is not whether Picasso's influence will continue, but how his art will continue to be reinterpreted by future generations of artists and art lovers. Picasso's art is timeless not just because of its technical brilliance, but because it continues to engage with the most profound questions about humanity, identity, and the world we live in. As long as there are artists willing to take risks, challenge conventions, and seek new ways of seeing, Picasso's spirit will continue to inspire. As we delve deeper into the essence of Picasso's enduring legacy, one cannot overlook the profound effect his work has had on our understanding of art as a living, evolving force. Picasso was not just an artist in the traditional sense, he was a symbol of possibility. His work stretched across mediums, techniques, and styles, each piece serving as a reflection of the turbulent times he lived through, yet also pointing forward to the future of art. To this day, Picasso's influence resonates in the work of countless contemporary artists who push the boundaries of what art can be, often taking inspiration from his adventurous spirit and his approach to the creative process. One of the most significant aspects of Picasso's lasting legacy is the way he continuously reinvented himself. His ability to defy categorization was remarkable. He was not confined to one style, but instead he evolved, adapting his vision to reflect the changing world around him. The sheer diversity of his work, from the somber hues of his blue period to the fragmented perspectives of Cubism to the playful and surreal interpretations in his later works, made it clear that Picasso was an artist who would not be defined by any single artistic movement. He became the epitome of creative freedom, someone whose entire career could be seen as a series of acts of liberation from artistic constraints. It's important to recognize that Picasso's experimentation went far beyond just visual art. His ability to innovate across multiple forms of media, sculpture, ceramics, lithography, and even theater design was groundbreaking. His inventive approach to ceramics, in particular, marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of the medium. By treating ceramics as a form of artistic expression in its own right, Picasso transformed the way it was perceived. He brought the same conceptual rigor to his ceramic works that he applied to his paintings, turning everyday objects like plates, pitchers, and bowls into expressive, thought-provoking pieces of art. Picasso's experimentation with printmaking is another area where his influence was felt. He not only mastered traditional techniques like etching and lithography, but he also helped redefine these mediums through his innovation. His prints, often characterized by bold lines, expressive forms, and inventive use of space, became an integral part of his artistic output. They further demonstrated his unrelenting desire to challenge the boundaries of his craft. His mastery of this medium also meant that his works were more accessible to a wider audience, as prints could be reproduced and distributed more widely than paintings. Through this democratization of his art, Picasso ensured that his revolutionary ideas reached as many people as possible. Picasso's impact on sculpture is similarly immense. His shift away from representational, figurative sculpture to more abstract forms and his use of unconventional materials reshaped the landscape of modern sculpture. His famous work, Guernica, had already revealed his unique approach to distortion and abstraction, but his later sculptures took this to new heights. He was not interested in simply making objects that were visually pleasing. Rather, he sought to explore the very nature of form, challenging traditional ideas of what a sculpture should look like. Works like Woman with Straw Hat and Head of Ore. A woman deconstructed human figures, reducing them to geometric shapes and fragmented forms. In doing so, Picasso opened the door for future generations of sculptors to experiment with abstraction, allowing for a broader range of expression in 3 dimensions. One of Picasso's most influential contributions to art was his role in the development of modern abstraction. In the early years of the 20th century, he, along with Georges Braque, laid the groundwork for Cubism, a movement that would alter the course of art history. Cubism was born out of a desire to move away from the traditional notions of perspective and representation that had dominated Western art for centuries. Instead of representing a subject from one fixed viewpoint, Picasso and Braque sought to represent multiple perspectives simultaneously, breaking down objects into geometric shapes and presenting them in fragmented forms. This revolutionary approach gave artists the freedom to explore abstraction, showing that a painting did not need to resemble reality in order to be meaningful. For Picasso, Cubism was not a stylistic choice, it was a way of seeing and experiencing the world, one that was not bound by the limitations of traditional perspective. As the 20th century progressed, Picasso's art evolved to reflect the shifting political, social, and cultural landscapes of his time. He was deeply affected by the tumultuous events of the Spanish Civil War, World War II, and the Cold War, and his works often responded to the chaos and suffering he saw around him. His masterpiece, Guernica, remains one of the most powerful anti-war statements ever created, and its continued relevance today is a testament to Picasso's ability to address universal themes of violence, suffering, and hope. But his political engagement did not stop at the canvas. Picasso was outspoken about his beliefs, aligning himself with the Communist Party in the post-war years, using his art as a tool for social change. His work from this period, including pieces like The Charnel House and The Dove of Peace, reflects a deep commitment to activism and a desire to make art that mattered in the real world. Even as Picasso became a symbol of artistic greatness, he never stopped being a provocateur. In fact, his willingness to challenge convention and push the boundaries of art was arguably what kept him so relevant throughout his life. He knew that art was a living, breathing force, constantly evolving, and he believed that it was an artist's responsibility to contribute to that evolution. He once said, "Every act of creation is first an act of destruction," and his life and work were full of examples of this idea in action. From the destruction of traditional forms to the breaking down of cultural norms, Picasso's art was a constant reminder that progress requires the willingness to tear down old structures in order to make room for new ones. As Picasso's influence continues to reverberate throughout the art world, it is clear that his contributions were not confined to a specific time or place. His work remains as relevant today as it was during his lifetime. From the vibrant works of contemporary artists who draw directly from his visual language to the way in which his ideas continue to inform the very fabric of art history, Picasso's legacy has shaped and will continue to shape the direction of art for generations to come. His willingness to embrace change, to explore the unknown, and to push beyond the boundaries of the conventional makes him a timeless figure in the world of art. Through his transformation of form, space, and color, Picasso taught us that art is not about following rules, it's about breaking them. He showed us that creativity is a limitless force, one that is not bound by tradition, convention, or even reality itself. His relentless pursuit of new ways of seeing the world continues to inspire all who dare to follow in his footsteps, creating a legacy that will undoubtedly live on for centuries to come. The final chapter of Picasso's life and legacy is a culmination of his unyielding quest to redefine art, to push it into new realms, and to ensure that his influence would remain indelible in the world of visual expression. As Picasso approached his later years, his work became more introspective, yet still vibrant and full of the restlessness that had defined his entire artistic career. His output slowed somewhat, but his vision was as fierce as ever, and his devotion to the exploration of new ideas and forms never faltered. Picasso's final years were marked by an increased focus on personal themes, reflecting his complex emotions and the profound changes in his own life. He revisited motifs that had been central to his earlier works, but with new perspectives. In his later years, he reflected on his youth, his love affairs, his family, and his role in the broader history of art. His work from this period was filled with a sense of reflection, yet it was still imbued with the energy and urgency that had characterized his earlier innovations. He continued to create prolifically, turning to works on paper, ceramics, and paintings that explored themes of love, mortality, and the passage of time. The end of Picasso's life, however, was not solely a time of retrospection. He remained actively involved in the art world, still engaging with fellow artists and collectors, continuing to evolve in his understanding of his own work and its place in the artistic landscape. His final years were marked by an extraordinary sense of creativity and a profound awareness of his place in art history. He seemed to understand that his legacy was already secure, and yet he continued to create with the same intensity that had characterized his earliest works. It was as though Picasso was determined to leave behind a body of work that would speak for him long after he was gone. Picasso passed away in 1973 at the age of 91, having spent over 70 years at the forefront of the art world. By the time of his death, he had become more than just an artist. He was a living legend, a symbol of the boundless possibilities of creativity. His works had transcended art movements, cultural boundaries, and political ideologies. Picasso's art had become synonymous with innovation, revolution, and genius, and his passing marked the end of an era in the history of art. After his death, the world continued to celebrate Picasso's life and work. His influence was felt across a wide range of fields: visual arts, literature, film, and even design. Museums around the world dedicated entire exhibitions to his life and legacy, displaying his masterpieces and showing how his work had shaped the development of modern art. The Picasso Museum in Paris, the Museu Picasso in Barcelona, and the Museo Picasso Malaga became major cultural institutions, not just preserving his works, but celebrating his extraordinary contributions to the world of art. The value of Picasso's work only increased in the years following his death. His paintings, sculptures, and ceramics fetched astronomical sums at auction, and his name became synonymous with artistic greatness. Yet, despite the commercial success and fame that came with his name, the essence of Picasso's work remained, grounded in the principles of innovation, experimentation, and self-expression. His work continued to inspire artists and thinkers from all walks of life, from painters to architects to musicians, filmmakers, and beyond. Picasso's influence was felt in both the art world and in the broader cultural sphere. His groundbreaking exploration of abstraction paved the way for future movements such as abstract expressionism, and his questioning of traditional forms inspired countless artists to take risks and break free from conventional standards. His approach to form, space, and color has left a permanent mark on the way we see the world. Picasso taught us that art is not just about representation. It is about feeling, about expressing the inner truths of the human experience, and about challenging the very systems that seek to define and limit creative expression. Beyond the art world, Picasso's influence extended into the realm of popular culture. His image, his famous quotes, and his works became part of the fabric of global consciousness. He had become not only an artist, but a cultural icon. His name recognized the world over as a symbol of genius and artistic integrity. His life and work became the subject of countless books, documentaries, and exhibitions, further cementing his place in history as one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. Picasso's legacy also continued to evolve in the decades following his death. As new generations of artists, critics, and art lovers revisited his work, they began to reinterpret his contributions through the lens of contemporary issues and concerns. His art, once considered the pinnacle of modernism, now took on new significance in the context of global culture, technology, and the evolving role of art in society. His ability to address universal themes of love, violence, beauty, and identity remained relevant, even as the world around us continued to change. Today, Picasso's work is as vital and relevant as ever. His influence is seen in the works of contemporary artists who draw inspiration from his revolutionary use of form and color, as well as his ability to deconstruct and reimagine the world around him. His impact can be felt not only in painting and sculpture, but also in photography, digital art, and multimedia installations. Picasso's vision has become part of the language of art itself, and his ability to see the world in new and radical ways continues to inspire and challenge artists to explore uncharted territories. His influence extends beyond the visual arts. His work has inspired filmmakers, musicians, writers, and designers to experiment with abstraction, to embrace new forms of expression, and to question the boundaries of their respective fields. Picasso's spirit of innovation and his commitment to self-expression has become a beacon for those who wish to make a mark on the world, whether through art, music, literature, or any other form of creative endeavor. As we reflect on the life and work of Pablo Picasso, we are reminded of the power of art to transform, to challenge, and to transcend the limitations of time and space. His contributions to the world of art will never be forgotten. His work remains a testament to the boundless possibilities of human creativity and the unyielding desire to see the world in new ways. Picasso's legacy lives on, not just in his masterpieces, but in the hearts and minds of every artist, every viewer, and every person who has been touched by his genius. In the end, Picasso's life reminds us that art is not just something we look at, it is something we feel, something that shapes the way we see the world, and something that, in its most profound moments, connects us to the deepest parts of our shared humanity. His legacy will continue to inspire and challenge us for generations to come. And so, the story of Pablo Picasso, the artist who changed the way we see the world, continues, forever etched in the history of art, his name and work enduring as a symbol of creativity, revolution, and the boundless potential of the human spirit.